Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. Once again, I am Ross Morasso with my guest here today, Sue Woodriffe. She owns a therapy practice out of Portsmouth, UK, with all sorts of alternative therapies, some that are becoming much more familiar to us, but some not as much. Things like the emotional freedom technique, blast technique, the Bowen technique. And I want to talk to her about some of these things today because they seem to have a profound effect on a lot of pervasive issues that a lot of us face. Common ones, not common ones, things we've heard about, and even chronic pain in and of itself. Sue, welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Nice to be here. Thank you.
So I call it alternative therapies, and alternative isn't necessarily a fair word to give you because they are therapies. I use that word, though, because they're not technically counted as mainstream traditional medicine. So tell me a little bit about your practice.
Well, my practice. I'm not medically qualified. I'm not a doctor, and I don't diagnose. I don't prescribe. But my practice is about very much helping people to deal with every, as you say, really a lot of everyday conditions that a lot of us suffer from, and don't necessarily need a medical intervention. Having said that, I would never ever tell people or suggest to people that they stop taking medication or that they started. It's not my job.
Now, sometimes, though, you work with your clients in tandem with their
Oh yes,
right with
yes,
general medical care or whatever. I
yes.
noticed I'll talk a little bit about this today. I've been seeing some things on your website and I've been creeping on you online, looking on some of the other things you've done on YouTube and things. And so as an example, people that are like going through cancer, right? And I bring that up as a common example also because it's
Yes.
protracted, right?
Mm,
However, it's
mm.
also something that anyone who has cancer is hoping to reach a finish line on that will have a beneficial conclusion for them. When people come
Yes.
to you with that, what are they looking for from you?
Well, some people are looking to resolve it without using any medication at all.
Hmm.
And some people are looking for support through the process, the medical process, much more the latter than the former. Occasionally, there are people who do get that we can resolve all our medical issues, I suspect, with doing the emotional work, but it's not a commonly known or commonly thought about. So more often I get people who want support as they go through surgery, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, or whatever it is. And when I do support people going through those processes, they do seem to come through it more easily than the people who don't have the support. And it's not an easy journey, but but we can make it more manageable.
Yeah, speaking in a relative basis, I get it. Now, when you
Mm.
say more easily, is it just because they maintain, a more hearty attitude about it, or sometimes when you're looking at sort of this scale that their doctor would say, you could expect your treatment to go for at least this long to this long sort of range, what we would see that they're on the shortened end of that scale?
It's not about. It doesn't. I don't think it affects the amount of the amount of time they're on these medications or on their radiotherapy or treatment or whatever, but they don't suffer to the degree. Partly because one of the first things I ever do with someone who comes with a cancer diagnosis is clear the sheer trauma of them being told that they've got it,
Mm.
and that weighs people down, and so they're carrying that. They're like carrying a rucksack with all these rocks in it of all the things that were said to them at the time of through that whole process of thinking there was something wrong, going to the doctor, going to the tests, getting the answer. It's like there's a rucksack just filling up with all these rocks, and I help them throw all those rocks out before, and then so they're in a lighter place before they actually start the treatments, and that of
Oh,
course has an effect.
so they'll come to you like even before, let's say they're going to use chemo in that particular,
Mm,
this instance,
mm.
like they'll start to work with you even before those treatments start.
Ideally, yes. I mean, the sooner I can work with somebody after a diagnosis, the better in terms of their sort of whole journey through it.
On our last show, we started to dive deeper into how our pasts have a
Mm,
way of guiding our health in the present.
yes.
And We don't want to redo that entire conversation, but just so we can, for those of us who are tuning in for the first time, let them find their footing. So tell me a little bit about how you find it common when you start working with people, the things that they uncover as you're working with them, right? That lead to their own internal healing.
I'd just like to really, I think I'd rather do is tell you where this all started and how we became to associate particular traumas or particular events with different types of cancer.
Sure. And what I'm getting at sometimes is that, and I know we're talking about cancer, but somebody could come to you because they have a back pain, but they've learned that it wasn't some ouch moment they had 3 weeks prior, that it actually probably its root causes from way, way before, right?
Yes, that can be true of any disease that is a specific disease, and if somebody comes with the things that we commonly call syndromes, then you have to look at each symptom one thing at a time.
I think this is what we're talking about because you have your own interesting story. We haven't really mentioned this in a while. So give us a brief overview of how you even came to become a practitioner of these techniques.
Because I had a lot of trauma as a child I had leg accidents and surgeries, and that was I didn't know that I was traumatized because we don't, and nobody did in those days. I'm in my 60s now, and all those years ago, nobody had heard of it. And I know that it played out in my life. And I know and I realize now looking back on it, it had a big effect on my family, but I didn't realize that at the time. And it did play out in my life, and I did end up with all sorts of, I ended up really with quite severe chronic pain that was far more than I needed to have because of the surgeries. And the thing that really helped me, I tried everything, but the thing that helped me most was Bowen to start with, and then EFT after that to deal with the kind of more emotional side of it and to deal with the trauma from it, the actual traumas of it happening and the event and the effects it's had on me in my life.
But I mean, you were at a point with your legs or your knees where like they were starting to say that you were going to be wheelchair bound, right?
I was told when I was 20 I'd be in a wheelchair by the time I was 40. That was the last thing the surgeon said to me.
And are you in a wheelchair now?
No. And I won't, and I will not, and I won't be. I absolutely know that I will do, and I do. I work really hard to keep myself on my feet.
I mean, I've seen some
Doesn't
pictures of
happen.
you like at the gym and
It's
stuff,
not
right?
magic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I go to the gym 2 or 3 times a week. I do electrical treatment on my leg muscles. I do everything. And if I didn't do all those things, I probably would be in a wheelchair by now. I have worked my socks off to stay on my feet, but I also make sure that I keep myself emotionally clear, and I have burn treatment or massage or body work done, keep just to help it all along.
So with Bowen, because it is one of
Mm.
the main therapies that you do with people in person. Explain what that is.
Bowen is a very gentle technique where we kind of roll gently over the muscles and tendons, it works on different receptors under the skin than a deep massage would, so it has a different effect, and it causes a relaxation, really, a very big relaxation effect. It puts people into parasympathetic, that rest and digest, calm state, but also because I'm working very gently with the muscles, it's our muscles that hold our bones together. So it can change someone who comes in with a slightly, it is slight usually, like a lopsided pelvis, so they might have back pain or knee pain because of it. And I can work on all the muscles that hold the pelvis. And then the pelvis can, and then they can just realign. The body realigns itself. Our body is very intelligent. I just give them a bit of information, and they line themselves up. It's wonderful.
It's just very fascinating to talk about it that way because the extremes, and for us Yanks here in the States, the extremes that it seems like that we need to go to fix the ailments that we're dealing with. And but as what I'm hearing from you saying, surgeries and all this sort of stuff, right? And so, am I hearing correctly? You can start using Bowen and basically you have muscles, tendons, the fascia, which we've talked about before. And
Yes.
for whatever the underlying reason is, it's constricting the body. And that
Yes.
mild contortion, which we might not notice on a day-to-day basis, over time can lead to chronic pain. as one
Yes.
particular like trajectory of like what happens to our
Yes.
bodies.
Yep.
And then Bowen will cause that to release. And then once it's released, the body like has its runway to then go ahead and like reset itself.
Yes. It's honestly, it's as magic as that, or it can be as magic as that.
Yeah.
It's when and there are, I've had people come on with severe sciatica. One treatment, they're fine. Sometimes it's more, but I honestly had people come in. I've done given them one treatment, and their sciatica's gone. And I just think, why do we not get this out there more? Why do people not know more about this?
I mean, it is out there. I've been looking online, and this is as you well, you're claiming it, but I mean, you haven't invented this, right? I mean, this has been
No, I
out.
haven't. No, no.
Practitioners like all over the world
Mm,
um, that are doing this Bowen technique, and I thought that was really fascinating. Now, EFT, this emotional freedom technique, and now this might not be the therapy that you always engage, but let's talk about something. So physical pain, I think we can wrap our head around that. Something like cancer, there's a definitive diagnosis. That's what's going
mm.
on. Now let's take something that we look at in the world that is just more part of life. So like let's say grief, right? You lose somebody very, very close to you, right? And there's
Yes,
books, and sure, you can go see psychiatrists and things like that. But what I think is always working against us is yes, it's hard. Yes, it's this big thing. Yes, it's okay to be sad. Like we all have that out there. But that still, you got to get on with it with life. But we all have our own pace, right? And sometimes life doesn't want to let us spend 8 months or whatever it might be. So if someone comes to you with sort of a like long-term grief, two ways to this. They know that they have it, or another way is they have pain, but it turns out that they really are still in grieving. How do these therapies, work in a way that, the passage of time is not working, right? And they've done all these other things, but it's just they're not getting on with it. So how do you work with them? And this, as you see me, for anyone who can see me here, I'm tapping on my head and at
yes,
various places. Um,
yes.
all right. Well, we're actually live on the air audio wise, but you'll be able to see this later on video. So, what does that do? Explain this to me, because it seems like from some of the testimonials I read about on your website and other things I've seen out on the net, it can almost be like a veil being lifted, or
Mm.
a bucket of water being dumped out, like of weight just going away and things like that. People talk about like how it's like not necessarily this incremental change, but sometimes people just feel it like evaporate. Not always, but so I found that people engaging with this stuff have had profound effects. So taking grief, pervasive grief, how do your therapies assist with people with that?
Well, I always take a history of somebody to find out what's going on in their lives. And sometimes when somebody gets kind of stuck in grief, it's almost like a compound grief. They've had losses, and then they kind of build up, and they get stuck in. They got so many losses that eventually they just get overwhelmed by grief. And then I would deal with each one individually. But I think I think I would start with the premise that if somebody's gone, like I don't know, my father, who died a long time ago, my father would far rather that I remembered him with a smile on my face than with tears in my eyes.
Mm.
If he could come back and say anything to me, that's what he'd say, and that's what I said with my mother. And and I think that's what most of our loved ones would say. They would far rather we remember them with a smile than with tears. And I think if you start from that premise and then work from there, I mean, by tapping, people do release the pain, and they just release the pain. I can't explain it better than that. Somehow, when you tap especially with a practitioner who can guide you through the whole process, um, the pain around it can just diminish.
So if we can do a short demonstration. So let's say, as an example, I'm your client, and I'm dealing with the loss of a loved one, right? So how would this work? So let's say I'm in person with you, although this now can be done virtually, right?
It can be done. Yeah, yes, I work on Zoom a lot with people all over the world. So yes.
Okay, so I think is it you've talked about meridians or like what are the places on your body that you would tap at? It's just not anywhere, right? It's specific
No,
spots.
it is very specific spots. Inner eyebrow, outer eyebrow, under the eye, under the nose, and the chin, collarbone, under the arm. That's the
Okay.
basic sequence.
Now, regardless of what we were dealing with, and we'll talk about a couple of the
Mm,
other things that can plague us here in a little bit. Is it like a routine? So like I would be talking about how I remember, my whatever, my parent or a spouse or, God forbid, a
mm.
child or something like that. And do you
Mm.
go on like a rotation around your body as you're talking, or do you focus on one area depending on what the topic of conversation might be?
No, I get people used to doing the whole tapping sequence. So we start with that. And once they can do it, because becomes a muscle memory. You can imagine how many times I've done it, but you don't need to do it many times before it becomes just a simple muscle memory. And then they get to the point because sometimes it's difficult to talk and tap until you're used to it. Once people are used to it, then we can really start. They can start talking to me about the whole experience they've had, and then I might home in on a something where I can see there's a particular emotional charge, and then I would do some specific work around that emotional charge, that part that has the emotional charge. So it may be that perhaps they couldn't, especially with times of COVID, maybe they didn't get to see their loved one before they died,
Mm.
or maybe it was an unexpected death, or maybe they just, whatever it is, whatever's holding the energy of grief, then I would do specific work around that with them.
Now, on your website, and for those of you who didn't catch us at the top of the show, I'm talking to Sue Woodriffe, and you can find her as well as some other things at suewoodriffe.co.uk. And that's Woodriffe is Oodriffe. So suewoodriffe.co.uk. And I mention this right now because you have like a free video on your site. Does it show you how to do this tapping? Like what does that video show you?
The video, if you go in and sign up, just shows you something you can do that will help you self-regulate, keep yourself calm or calm down if you're agitated. It's not tapping.
Okay.
I intend to put a tapping, how to tap video on my YouTube channel, but there's lots of videos out on YouTube that will show you how to tap, basically how to tap.
Okay. So
It's
then people are tapping now, and I
yes.
heard you said sometimes, it's tough in the beginning to walk and chew gum at the same time, right? So they don't necessarily talk and tap at the same time. Um, so then do you kind of maybe have them internally, like just think about what is troubling them? Like how does the rest of the session work, right?
I would, I might, sometimes people feel things, they might feel it in their body, feel it in their chest. So tell me would tap on this feeling in my chest, which then might have a shape or a color. So it might end up as this, this dull grey heavy weight in my chest. And so I tap around on that because it's the feeling, getting into somebody's feeling. And as you do that, whatever's going on in their internal world changes. So suddenly it becomes whatever it is might become softer, it might become lighter in color. And you kind of assess how things are changing for somebody. So we're working in metaphor a lot of the time,
Mm. So there's like a
because that's
partial
how the unconscious
meditation.
works as well.
Is there like a
No,
meditation that
not
goes
really.
along with it?
No, no,
Okay.
we just keep tapping on it. This solid grey lump in my chest, this solid grey lump in my chest. And you keep
Mm.
tapping on this solid grey lump in my chest, and then I say, is it still solid? And they go, oh no, maybe it's not. Maybe it's a bit softer. Okay, this softer grey lump in my chest, is it still grey? No, it's gone pink. Oh, this softer green pink. And as that changes, their feeling changes and their mood lifts. That's just one way of approaching it. Not everybody will feel anything in the body, and then I have to be more, be creative, find different ways of accessing the unconscious, basically.
Okay. So something else that I was also reading on your website, staying with this though, is
Hmm.
phobias. Like you had helped, at least I was writing one thing about someone who had claustrophobia, right? Now that's very
Yes,
common out there on planet
yes,
Earth. And I don't
yes.
think any of us particularly want to be sitting underneath a car anyway, but like the closed spaces. So,
Hmm.
but why I bring up phobias is because they can be very intense, very acute. Often we don't know why we feel that way, but we're just very clear when we're feeling it, right? Fear of heights and all those other things. And people be terrified of heights and they never fell that they can remember anyway. So you can use this for just those sorts of like, because I don't even call them like problems per se, right? Like we're all scared of something, but if we want to say that, right? So this helps with like phobias as well. It can.
Well, phobias often are a problem, aren't they? Though, because if it impinges on your life, then it's a problem. If it doesn't, then if I so I have had, and I've got over it a lot, a spider phobia. But I live in a country where
Mm.
there aren't too many spiders, so it wasn't terrible. If I lived in a country where there were lots of spiders, it would really have a big impact on my life. And if I suffered from claustrophobia, but I had to fly frequently, or I was a miner and I had to go down underground, then it would be a problem.
Like you're right, yeah, right. It could totally interfere with
That's
your
for me.
entire career.
You know, you couldn't go in a lift. Well, I know lots of people that can't go in lifts because they're claustrophobic. Well, I'd be in real trouble because I can't walk up and down the stairs. So if I couldn't get into a lift, it would be a huge problem in my life.
Right. And an elevator is
Mm,
something that, you can still
yeah, sorry,
stretch your,
elevator.
hey,
Yeah.
whatever's good, right? There's probably nine names for it. It just depends on where we all reside. But
Yes.
right, and that's still a big enough space where if we were in it by ourselves, we could still stretch our arms out and not touch the walls, right? But that can still, for people, you
Claustrophobia isn't about whether you're in a big space. You can get
mm,
claustrophobia. People get claustrophobia in aeroplanes and in trains and in cars and any confined. It's more about a confined space you can't get yourself out of, rather than the size of it. I think.
and you've been able though to get people though out of it, like for good.
Yes, I've dealt with people with claustrophobia, so they can now go in a lift or go and sit in a theatre, and because that's another time people get it. Yes, yes, I've worked with people with particularly claustrophobia.
Now, length of time, and I know everybody's different, right? Like maybe some people just have wonderful results after a first session, but what would be an expectation of a minimum? How many sessions would you tell people to, if they really wanted to at least give it a go to see if it is something
For a
worth?
phobia, I would say if we haven't done it in 3 sessions, then there's something wrong. But I wouldn't so allow three, but I wouldn't expect it to take three for a
Oh,
phobia. For a straightforward phobia.
now what about like PTSD? So same thing, we
Oh
can now
well,
get triggers, right? But we now had something traumatic that often we do remember, right? But that's still something that
yes.
you could engage in, right?
I've dealt with a lot of people with PTSD from all sorts of military people and people medical, all sorts of things. People get PTSD. Yeah, I've done a lot of work with it.
And the same
Um,
with the tapping that you do has been able to help
tough.
them.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, what does it look like?
It,
So, right? Because they still remember the events, right? I mean, it's not like the memory gets purged from their mind. So, like, what changes?
no, it's not that. It's not that we can't change the memory. What we can change is the feeling about it. What we can change is the pain around it, the hurt around it, the grief around it, the whatever it is, the the shock that's still in the body, the shock that's in the mind, the shock of it all. We can just move all that out slowly, gently, or quickly, depending on the client.
I about a year ago, I was in a car wreck. Everyone was fine, but it was just one of those moments of it came out of nowhere, right? My car was totaled.
Mm, mm,
And fortunately, I was just on a city street, like something in the freeway. But I recall for the next several weeks, driving in the car, how much more like on edge I was over that.
yes.
Now, that dissipated for me, right? It's just because I think
Mm,
probably because there wasn't all this other potential bad outcomes that could have gone with it. But at a slight level, I can already relate to how this would
mm,
happen to people. But getting into something where war or if people were
mm,
involved, unfortunately, mass shootings, all these things that are happening
mm,
now
mm,
in
mm.
today's day and age, they can now still recollect something as intense as something like a mass shooting, and but no longer, so they can remember it, but they're not emotionally like reacting to it anymore. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, you can get to that. You can get to that place in that space. But when you're dealing with something like a mass shooting, you're dealing with a community, and you have
Yeah.
to, ideally you want to. And I know there are teams that do go in, and I know a lot of them do tapping as well. Teams that go in and look after the community. I know there's someone organises it, and she said when I was on a webinar with her, she said, "Well, you've got to be prepared to go and live somewhere for 18 months or six to 18 months. because you're dealing with a community when there's been a mass shooting.
So in that line, so things like the emotional freedom technique can be engaged. I know, I'm sure the implementation is different because you have all these people, but basically almost like a group consciousness sort of thing. Like,
Yes, yes.
and that would be required then, right? Like, not required, but it would be incomplete therapy then if it was only just one person per se, if in fact the whole community is still in an intense state of shock and grief. Like, there's value in my neighbor getting better, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yes, if you've got something going on and there's a big collective energy around it, we pick up stuff from each other, don't we? I mean, you can walk into a room and know that the two people in it have just had an argument. Yes, yeah. So if you imagine that you're in a community where there's been a big disaster, be it, it might be in a mass shooting, could have been in this country. We had the big coal mine disaster at Aberfan, but when you have a community that's really been shaken and shocked by something, there's a big group energy. And so even if you can work with one person and make them feel better, but then it's like taking the goldfish out of a pond and then you treat the goldfish, make the goldfish feel better, and then you put it back in a dirty pond. So you can take one person out of this awful situation, make them feel better, but when you put them back with everyone else that's feeling so bad, it starts to creep back in again.
Right. So there's a more like economy of therapy, as you were, because as everyone around you starts to get better, as opposed to going to a grocery store and everyone's all nervous and on edge. And so they do that. So like these sorts of EFT therapists, and I know that there's maybe they'll come and deal with the whole community.
They'll be part of a multidisciplinary team, but yes, it will be one of the tools that could be used to great effect to help with that kind of a situation.
This is very fascinating because, and we're just about out of time, but we often think that if you're going to go into therapy that you're now in for a slog, months and months and months and months and months, and that expectation can stop a lot of us from even trying, right? And that's why one of the reasons I wanted to ask you about this and talk about with you with this today is to know that there is relief that doesn't have to be months and months and months away. So once again, Sue Woodriffe, you can find her at suewoodriffe.co.uk, and Woodriffe is Oodriffe, Woodriffe. Are there any other places that people can look you up at, Sue?
I know that's my website. That's the main place, best place to look.
Okay, and it's easy enough. It's a really nice laid out website, by the way. So
thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being with us here today, Sue. And you're welcome back on the show anytime.
Thank you very much. It's been great. Cheers.
And thank you all for tuning in. I am Ross Morasso. Until next time.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.